So I'm going to try something new here, not usual for this channel. I've been playing around for the last couple of days with GPT-4 for philosophy things, sort of see what it knows in general knowledge and that sort of thing. And then asking it questions, having little dialogues, just sort of kind of putting it through its paces. I tried a few of these experiments before with earlier versions of these large language models, and they had some impressive recall, but they had a tendency to go to this way, conventional thinking, just whatever they is in their training base, more or less. You can do a little bit more with prompts you give them and so forth. But before work, I've been involved in some things which are looking at the more recent version of this, GPT-4 in particular. And I thought I would try it out for some of these philosophy use cases. And I just thought I'd share some of those results that I'm seeing and then maybe comment on a little bit, get people's comments. So the first dialogue, this wasn't the first one I did, but the first one I want to discuss with you guys is on the Theaetetus, which we did recently in the philosophy group. So the Theaetetus on knowledge. And I start off with just, and this is what a strategy I have, a general question that's going to ask it about the subject matter so that it has that in its sort of recent priming. It knows the remaining questions are going to be in the context of a particular work. So my initial question is just, what are the main concerns of Plato's dialogue Theaetetus? And this is the first response it comes back with. This is already reasonably impressive, but this is the kind of recall thing that we were already seeing in previous generations. But for those who aren't experienced with it, it may still be impressive. This is the first time you've heard that these things can do this sort of thing. So Plato's Theaetetus is a dialogue between Socrates and the young mathematician Theaetetus, which primarily concerns the nature and definition of knowledge. The dialogue explores several main philosophical concerns, including epistemology. The Theaetetus is primarily focused on investigating the nature of knowledge or epistemology. It asks questions like, what is knowledge and how do we acquire it? By engaging in a series of discussion thought experiments, Socrates and Theaetetus attempt to uncover a satisfactory definition of knowledge. The Protagorean doctrine. The dialogue delves into the Protagorean claim that man is the measure of all things. This relativist viewpoint suggests that what is true or real for one person may not be true or real for another. Socrates critiques this position by pointing out its logical inconsistencies and self-defeating nature. Heraclitean flux. The Theaetetus also examines Heraclitus' idea of the world being in a constant state of change or flux. This perspective holds that nothing remains the same and everything is in a perpetual state of becoming. Socrates challenged the implications of this belief, particularly as it relates to the possibility of acquiring knowledge. The distinction between knowledge and perception. One of the central questions of the dialogue is whether knowledge can be equated with perception. Socrates argues that while perception may provide a basis for knowledge, it is not sufficient in itself. He contends that knowledge requires an additional element, true judgment, accompanied by a rational explanation or understanding, logos. The role of the philosopher. Throughout the dialogue, Socrates models the role of a philosopher as a questioner and thinker who challenges common beliefs. This Socratic method of inquiry, which involves asking probing questions to uncover the truth, serves as a model for philosophical exploration. In summary, the main concerns of Plato's Theaetetus revolve around the nature of knowledge, with particular focus on the relationship between knowledge and perception, the critique of relativism, and the role of the philosopher in the pursuit of the truth. So that's the first response it's giving, right? And this is the kind of thing that you could expect, it's like a cliff notes of the dialogue. It's something it could easily have learned from its training. It's clearly getting some of the sophistication with which you could talk about these things just from the relative quality of a lot of essays that are written in this academic context, right? So it's still impressive recall that the only prompt being the dialogue of Theaetetus can give this kind of summary of the themes of the dialogue. But one could easily think that that's just because it's seen a lot of summaries of Theaetetus as a dialogue, right? So already reasonable outline kind of stuff, but can you tell this apart from an undergraduate? Not yet, right? Okay. So I'm triggered a little bit by the statement in the second to last where it's the summary says that Socrates contends that knowledge requires an initial element, true judgment accompanied by a rational explanation or understanding. And there's a very common summary of the Theaetetus that regards the discussion of true opinion in the second half of the dialogue, true opinion with an account, as being a precursor of justified true belief, which is a later famous position of what knowledge might be in a lot of later philosophy, and this can point to a point of origin in the Theaetetus. But for those who are most familiar with the dialogue, it doesn't actually end up stumping for that. It examines that argument, but in the end, Socrates shoots it down as well as the previous argument that knowledge is perception. and as in many Platonic dialogues, it ends in aporia. So anyway, my next question is just to point this out. So my next prompt to the bot is just, does Socrates actually argue that true opinion with an account is knowledge, or does he attack that theory of knowledge too? So this is the first time I'm sort of steering its response with the question. Its next response says, in the Theaetetus, Socrates does propose that knowledge could be true opinion with an account or justification. This suggestion comes towards the end of the dialogue when Socrates, Theaetetus, and the interlocutors have rejected several previous definitions of knowledge. The proposal can be seen as an early version of the justified true belief account of knowledge that has been influential in epistemology. However, it is important to note that Socrates did not fully endorse this account in the dialogue. Instead, he raises some issues and puzzles about it, leaving the question of whether true opinion with an account is knowledge unresolved. The dialogue ends in aporia, which is a state of puzzlement or inconclusiveness, which is typical of many of Plato's dialogues. The Theaetetus leaves readers with the impression that the question of knowledge is complex and that a satisfactory definition remains elusive. This inconclusive ending can be seen as an invitation for their inquiry and reflection on the nature of knowledge, rather than a definitive answer to the question at hand. All right, so it didn't offer that qualification in the initial response, but it knew enough when slightly prompted to offer that that qualification. Again, it could be just sort of follow-up question. It's all still very conventional wisdom. There's nothing non-conventional wisdom here, but prompted for the nuance that it missed in the first response. It fleshes it out. I didn't mention to it things like justified true belief as a later philosophical concern. It did that on its own, right? A lot of these things are. It got what I was after with the question correct as to what it had been missing about the nature of the end of the dialogue. All right. So next, I wanted to get a little bit deeper at the hinge of the dialogue, where we move from the perception argument to the opinion or true opinion argument, is the culminating criticism of the idea of knowledge as perception by Socrates. And there's a particular notion that it turns upon. And so my next question was meant to probe that. So here's what the prompt was. What role is played in the argument by the notion of the common, and what are examples of aspects or judgments that Socrates traces to the common? I put the common in quotation marks in both places. Koinon in Greek is the term being used here. And for those who don't know, this is one of the ways that Socrates refers to what is not judged by a single one of the senses, but seems to be higher kinds that are used by all of them. But I'll let you hear what the bot responds, because I think it does a reasonable job on this. So here's the response. In the Theaetetus, the common, or the common sensibles, plays a significant role in the discussion about knowledge and perception. The common refers to those aspects of perception that are shared by multiple senses, as opposed to aspects that are unique to a particular sense. Socrates introduces the concept of the common as part of his critique of the idea that knowledge is perception. Socrates argues that while perception deals with objects specific to each sense, such as colors for sight and sounds for hearing, it does not grasp the common features that underlie these sensory experiences. The common includes aspects like existence, identity, difference, similarity, and number. These aspects are essential for making judgments and are not reducible to any single sense. For example, when we perceive two different colors, we can recognize that they are both colors, identity, and that they are distinct from each other, difference. We can also recognize similarities between objects perceived by different senses, such as when we compare the size or shape of objects that we see or touch. See and touch. Socrates uses the concept of the common to emphasize that there is more to knowledge than mere sensory perception. He argues that to be able to grasp the common aspects of experience and make judgments about them requires a higher cognitive function, which he refers to as the soul's power of discrimination or judgment. This suggests that knowledge cannot be equated with perception alone, as it also involves an active intellectual component that goes beyond the passive reception of sensory information. In summary, the notion of the common plays a crucial role in Socrates' argument against the idea that knowledge is perception. By highlighting the role of the common in making judgments and understanding the world, Socrates underscores the need for a more comprehensive account of knowledge that includes both sensory perception and intellectual understanding. So basically, it nailed the concern I was steering it towards at the center of the dialogue, right? Which is impressive already, but again, this is the kind of thing that you might expect it could have learned from, thick description of the center of the dialogue in many essays. It's still narrowing in on the context, getting all the terms right. The words "the common," outside of the particular context of the discussion so far, could have all kinds of meaning, and it didn't confuse by any of them, right? It got the actual philosophical content of the thought that Socrates was after and why he was introducing it at this point in the dialogue. just spot on, which is impressive. It's still being conventional. It's following the dialogue. It's following what learned people may have said about the dialogue, but it's still showing impressive nuance. It's not being distracted by similarities of the language in other contexts, anything like it. Okay. My next question is now trying to get at the importance of that, looking a little bit retrospectively rather than just prospectively. So the next prompt is, since intellectual understanding is not reducible to perception and appears to be crucial to actual knowledge, what follows for the earlier thesis of Protagoras, that everything perceived is knowledge for the one who perceives it? That's the whole prompt. The response from the GPT-4. Socrates' argument that intellectual understanding is crucial to actual knowledge has significant implications for the earlier thesis of Protagoras that everything perceived is knowledge for the one who perceives it. This Protagorean thesis is a form of relativism, claiming that what is true or real depends upon the individual perception. If perception were equivalent to knowledge, as Protagoras claims, it would follow that there is no objective truth or reality beyond individual perception. However, Socrates' emphasis on intellectual understanding as a key component of knowledge challenges Protagoras' thesis. By highlighting the role of the common and the need for an active intellectual component to grasp these common aspects of experience, Socrates demonstrates that there is more to knowledge than mere perception. This suggests that not everything perceived is knowledge for the one who perceives it, as Protagoras claims. Furthermore, Socrates' critique of the Protagorean thesis reveals several logical inconsistencies and self-deceiving aspects. For example, if everything perceived is knowledge and perceptions vary from person to person, it would follow that contradictory claims could both be considered knowledge. This undermines the very idea of knowledge as something objective and reliable. In summary, Socrates' emphasis on the role of intellectual understanding and acquiring knowledge undermines Protagoras' thesis that everything perceived is knowledge for the one who perceives it. By demonstrating the limitations of perception and the need for an intellectual component to attain knowledge, Socrates argues against the relativist stance and suggests that there is more to knowledge than mere perception. Okay, so this is a little bit repetitious, and this is a little bit conventional in the layout of all of it, a little bit long-winded, but it still manages to get the proper idea here and to place even a portion of the argument of Theaetetus that comes after the event in question in its proper light for the weight of the previous discussion. The other aspects of the previous discussion, the other arguments against Protagoras that occurred in the ordinary flow of the dialogue, are still brought back in. So it's still clearly, trying to follow what was said in the dialogue more than just the reasoning, but it is able to see that something which happened later in the dialogue refutes something that happened earlier in the dialogue, and why. The next prompt for me, with what faculty or power does the mind apprehend intellectual truth? Given that it appears such judgments transcend mere sense experience proper. Notice I've not made any reference to the immediate context, although that's understood. The response. In Plato's philosophy, the faculty or power with which the mind apprehends intellectual truth beyond mere sense experience, is called nous or intellect. This concept is closely related to the world of forms or ideas, the realm of unchangeable, eternal, and perfect truths that exist independently of the material world. Plato argues that knowledge of the eternal forms is what constitutes genuine knowledge, as opposed to the ever-changing and unreliable sensory experience of the material world. According to Plato, the human soul has a pre-existing innate understanding of the forms. This understanding is obscured when the soul is embodied, and it must be recollected through the process of dialectic reasoning, which is exemplified by the Socratic method of questioning. This method allows the mind to grasp the unchangeable truths of the forms and gain true knowledge that transcends sense experience. The faculty of nous or intellect is the cognitive power that enables the mind to apprehend intellectual truth by accessing the forms. It is through the exercise of this faculty that the mind can grasp the common aspects of experience, such as existence, identity, difference, and number, which are crucial for making judgments and attaining knowledge. This intellectual understanding goes beyond the limitations of sensory perception and allows the mind to access the eternal, unchanging truths of reality. In summary, Plato proposes that the mind apprehends intellectual truth through the faculty of nous or intellect, which allows the mind to access the eternal forms and grasp the common aspects of experience that underlie sensory perceptions. This intellectual understanding transcends limitations of sense experience and enables the mind to attain genuine knowledge of unchangeable truths of reality. It got repetitious there at the end. The first noticeable thing is that it took the cue from not simply referring to the dialogue to go to the wider context of Plato's whole philosophy as a partial answer to this question. I don't think that answer was a great one. It's still looking up, so to speak, but it's looking up with impressive grasp of what the issues are that were raised by the additional prompt. The next prompt. Given that nous allows something like direct access to genuine knowledge, what accounts for the non-perceptual errors of opinion when those arise? Discuss in terms of examples actually occurring in the dialogue. Note I just say in the dialogue. I don't mention that the dialogue is the Theaetetus. The response. In the Theaetetus, Plato acknowledges the existence of non-perceptual errors of opinion, which cannot be attributed to sensory perception alone. These errors arise when there's a discrepancy between our beliefs or opinions and the true nature of the forms or ideas that underlie reality. While the faculty of nous allows direct access to genuine knowledge, non-perceptual errors can occur when the mind fails to access or apprehend the forms correctly. There are several reasons why such errors may arise, and a few examples are discussed in the dialogue. Mistaking one thing for another. One example of non-perceptual error occurs when Socrates discusses the case of a jury that has been persuaded to believe in the guilt or innocence of someone on trial. In this case, the jurors form opinions based on the speeches they have heard rather than directly perceiving the truth. They may be led to form false opinions by the heroic or persuasive abilities of the speakers rather than the truth of the matter. This error arises from an inability to discern the true nature of the forms, as the jurors' opinions are based on indirect, potentially misleading information. Inadequate reasoning or dialectic. Another example of non-perceptual error arises when individuals engage in flawed reasoning or fail to use the dialectical method effectively. As mentioned earlier, the Socratic method of questioning is a tool for recollecting the innate knowledge of the forms. However, if the method is not applied correctly, or if an individual's reasoning is fallacious, they may arrive at false conclusions. This error stems from the failure to grasp the true nature of the forms through rigorous intellectual inquiry, confusion, or ignorance. Non-perceptual errors can also arise from confusion or ignorance about the nature of the forms. For example, Socrates discussed the case of someone who can recite the definition of a concept but not truly understand its meaning or application. In this case, the individual may have memorized the words associated with a form, but fails to grasp its essence. This error results from an incomplete or superficial understanding of the forms, which prevents the individual from accessing genuine knowledge. In summary, non-perceptual errors of opinion arise when the mind fails to access or apprehend the forms correctly. These errors can be attributed to factors such as mistaken beliefs, inadequate reasoning, or confusion about the nature of the forms. Although the faculty of nous allows direct access to genuine knowledge, it is not infallible, and errors can occur when individuals fail to engage with the forms effectively. So a couple of aspects of this. Overall, this was not one of its best answers. There are definite things in the dialogue about cross-understanding where the attributes of A are ascribed to B and vice versa that it left out. And there are other things it brought in that, not entirely relevant. The example of errors resulting from understanding the definition of a concept by having memorized it, but not truly comprehending its meaning or application, that was a little bit more a posit for what may be going on here. But at any rate, this was one of its best answers, but it's still mostly tracking. But I wanted to latch on to the part that was closest to being, what could really be going on here, which is an understanding of the word only from memorizing it. And there's an example in the dialogue where Socrates tries to show in the errors of true opinion, or that true opinion within account is not obviously knowledge, some cases where it is analysis fails. By that I mean, you just try to understand words by the elements of which they're composed, or a wagon by the parts of which it's composed, but you do not actually get the essence of either one that way. So those are some of the examples, some of the puzzles that are examined by Socrates in the second half of the Theaetetus. All that is just preface from me. The actual prompt was, can a word be understood by understanding each of the elements of which the word is composed, whether letters, syllables, or tokens? Can a wagon be understood by understanding a short list of parts needed to compose a wagon? What is missing in accounts of wholes that attempt to understand them solely from their decomposition into smaller elements? Now, this is an issue raised in the dialogue, but I'm presenting it completely more general in that context. All right, here's its response. Understanding a word or an object like a wagon solely by decomposing it into smaller elements such as letters, syllables, and tokens, or by listing its parts, is an incomplete approach to understanding the whole. While it may provide some insight into the structure or components, it misses crucial aspects that contribute to the meaning or function of the whole. When it comes to understanding a word, merely recognizing its individual letters or syllables doesn't capture its full meaning or its usage in language. To understand a word fully, one needs to consider its meaning within a specific context, its relationship to other words, its grammatical function, and its historical and cultural background. Understanding a word involves more than its constituent parts. It requires considering the word as a linguistic and semantic unit within a broader system. Similarly, understanding a wagon by merely listing its parts, e.g. wheels, axles, frame, and so on, is insufficient to grasp its function, purpose, or how it operates. To fully understand a wagon, one must consider how the parts work together to serve a specific purpose, the context in which they are used, and the broader cultural and historical factors that shaped its development. In both cases, accounts of wholes that attempt to understand them solely from their decomposition to smaller elements miss the following aspects. Relationships and interactions. The way in which the constituent parts relate and interact with each other is essential for understanding the whole. In language, words derive their meaning and function from the relationship to other words and their role within a sentence or context. In the case of wagon, understanding how the parts work together as a system is crucial to grasp its functionality. Context, the meaning and function of a whole often depend on the context in which they're situated. Words can have different meanings or connotations depending on the situation, while the use and purpose of a wagon can vary based on the specific environment in which it operates. Purpose or function, understanding a whole requires considering its purpose or function. Words serve as communicative tools that convey meaning and information, while a wagon serves as means of transportation. Merely examining the constituent parts does not reveal these broader purposes or functions. Historical and cultural factors. The development and usage of words and objects like wagons are shaped by historical and cultural factors. Understanding these factors can provide valuable insight into the meaning, function, and significance of the whole. In conclusion, understanding a whole solely through its decomposition into smaller elements is an incomplete approach. It misses crucial aspects such as relationships and interactions between parts, context, purpose or function, and historical or cultural factors. To fully understand a whole, whether as a word or an object like a wagon, it is necessary to consider these aspects in addition to its constituent parts. So this is quite good because none of this at that level of detail is in the dialogue itself. These are things which it is commenting on from just the issue of is an analysis in the sense of breaking apart something into constituents sufficient as an account of the thing? And the answer is no, because you have to know how it is put together and how it functions in a wider whole. But that's a good answer, and it's fleshed out, but it's fleshed out not just from the context of the dialogue, but from broader things that it knows or believes it knows about language. There's something a little, stilted about how it maintains the parallelism introduced in the prompt throughout the question, but it does that, treats it like an exercise it has to perform, repeats itself a little bit, but overall it conveys a correct thought that is mirrored by one of the thoughts that is being stressed by Socrates in the latter half of the dialogue, just by the inadequacy of an account based on analysis that he is showing there. So this is quite far from the original text of the dialogue, but it is seeing the same thought that is conveyed to it in the prompt and that is conveyed in the dialogue itself. There is another aspect of this, though, which is that it's almost like it's steering towards the idea that an account has to be exhaustive in terms of fully inclusive context in order to count as the account that, along with true belief, makes something knowledge. And I'll come back to that. But first, an intervening question. My next prompt was, when considering and criticizing the idea that knowledge may be defined as true opinion with an account, the example of the jury, swayed by rhetoric, stressed the importance of having an account. Swayed by passion or persuasiveness, the hypothetical jury did not possess such an account of the truth of the matter submitted to their judgment, so they had only opinion in the matter, but not knowledge. In the examples of words and wagons, what was missing? They had some true opinion in the matter, how to spell a word, for example, or the main pieces needed to compose a wagon. These were not false, and they had some account, the decomposition. Nevertheless, Socrates argues they did not have knowledge. What specifically is missing in the formula, true opinion with an account, in these examples, such that they do not rise to the level of actual knowledge? This is a pretty sophisticated question to ask it. Okay, it's going to be a little bit long-winded in the answer, but here's what it gives an answer. In the examples of words and wagons, the true opinion with an account is indeed present to some extent, as there is an understanding of the elements or parts. However, what is missing in these examples, and what prevents the understanding from rising to the level of actual knowledge, is a more comprehensive and holistic understanding of the whole. In the case of words, although one might have a true opinion about how to spell a word, which is an account of its decomposition, it does not suffice for genuine knowledge about the word. Knowledge of a word involves understanding its meaning, usage, grammatical function, and the role it plays in a broader linguistic system. Merely being able to spell a word correctly does not provide this richer understanding, which is necessary for genuine knowledge. Similarly, in the case of the wagons, having a true opinion about the main pieces needed to compose a wagon and an account of their decomposition does not amount to actual knowledge of the wagon. To have knowledge of the wagon was to understand how the parts work together to fulfill a specific function, the context in which the wagon is used, and the broader cultural and historical factors that have shaped its development. The true opinion with an account formula in these examples lacks a deeper understanding of the relationships and interactions between the parts, the context, the purpose or function, and the historical or cultural factors that contribute to the meaning or function of the whole. This more comprehensive understanding is what distinguishes actual knowledge from mere true opinion, accompanied by a partial account. In summary, while the examples of words and wagons involve some level of true opinion with an account, they do not rise to the level of actual knowledge because they lack more holistic understanding of the whole. To achieve genuine knowledge, one must consider not only the constituent parts, but also the broader aspects that contribute to the meaning or function of the whole. So it actually tried to answer the question. It actually gave an answer to the question. It gave it in terms of this comprehensive understanding and much of what it had responded to the previous question. So it's following a chain of reasoning here, and it's leading towards something like true opinion with an exhaustive account is knowledge. It doesn't actually manage to say true existence with exhaustive account is the new formula for knowledge, but it's very close to that. Okay, so I want to now steer it a little bit in the other direction and see why that on its own, the conclusion that it didn't quite state, but came close to, would itself have a problem with it. The next prompt is, can an account of an item existing in a complex system of relations, or more generally, speaking within the complex system of relations that constitute all reality, truly be comprehensive or holistic enough to encompass every relation into which a part, say a word, may enter? Is not every account explicating the role or meaning of a part of a larger complex system necessarily a reductive account, one that must leave some possible relationships out in order to simplify, concentrate, and stress the aspects of greatest relevance? Would not a truly comprehensive account of even a single object entail describing virtually the entire system in which it is embedded? So that's the prompt. I'm trying to steer it to see that comprehensive account doesn't really make sense, right? There's no upper limit on what's needed for comprehensiveness. Here's its response. You raise an important point regarding the limitations of any account in capturing the full complexity and entirety of an item's relationships within a larger system of all of reality. It is true that no account can be fully comprehensive or holistic in encompassing every possible relationship or aspect of a part within a complex system. Given the vast and intricate web of relationships and interactions that constitute reality, any account of an item within this system will necessarily be reductive to some extent. To make sense of the world and communicate effectively, you often need to simplify, concentrate, and focus on aspects that are most relevant or significant for our purposes. A truly comprehensive account of even a single object would indeed entail describing virtually the entire system in which it is embedded, taking into consideration every possible relationship, interaction, and factor that could influence the object. Such an account would be practically impossible to achieve due to the limitations of human cognitions and the constraints of language. However, this does not mean that we cannot strive for a more comprehensive understanding of an object or a part of a complex system than a mere reductive account might provide. While it is true that any account will inevitably leave some relationships or aspects out, the goal is to capture as much of the complexity and richness of the object or part as is feasible and relevant for our purposes. In this sense, knowledge can be seen as a dynamic and evolving process, where our understanding of an object or part within a complex system is refined and expanded over time as we gather more information, explore new perspectives, and engage with the world in different ways. The pursuit of knowledge, then, becomes a continuous endeavor to deepen our understanding of the intricate web of relationships and interactions that constitute reality, recognizing that any account will always be, to some extent, incomplete and reductive. So I put it to you that it got the thought there. It followed the train of thought, and it got the actual thought I was prompting it towards. Now the next, and to me, this is where, can we tie this back to why something happened in the dialogue? Next prompt is, why did Socrates leave his listeners without a final definition of knowledge? What benefit did he claim he had conferred on them by their having listened to all of his criticisms of each successive definition in advance without accepting any of them individually at the end? Its response. Socrates leaves his listeners without a final definition of knowledge because his goal is not to provide ready-made answers, but to encourage critical thinking, self-examination, and intellectual humility. By engaging in dialogue and examining the various definitions and theories, Socrates' interlocutors are led through a process of questioning and reflection that encourage them to think more deeply about the nature of knowledge and the limitations of their own understanding. By examining and criticizing each successive definition of knowledge, Socrates is able to highlight the flaws, inconsistencies, and complexities inherent in these definitions. This process not only helps his interlocutors realize the inadequacies of their current understanding, but also prompts them to consider alternative perspectives and refine their own ideas. Socrates claims that the benefit conferred on his listeners through this process is the development of their critical thinking abilities and the cultivation of an attitude of intellectual humility. By recognizing the limitations of their own understanding, they are better prepared to continue the search for knowledge with a more open and inquisitive mindset. Additionally, the process of engaging in dialectical conversation fosters a sense of intellectual camaraderie, where both Socrates and his interlocutors learn from each other and grow in their understanding. Socrates' approach to discussing knowledge and philosophical inquiry in general reflects his famous dictum, "I know that I know nothing." This statement encapsulates his belief in the importance of recognizing one's own ignorance and embracing the continuous pursuit of wisdom. By leaving his listeners without a final definition of knowledge, Socrates emphasizes the value of the process of inquiry itself and encourages his interlocutors to continue their search for understanding and wisdom. That was the end of its answer. I did not think it needed a follow-up. I think it got the point, right? So you can see elements of this, which is returning to a conventional understanding of the dialogue or of Socrates, and the kinds of things it may have learned from its training as, what's in good essays about Socrates, but it still followed the train of thought to the conclusion. All right, so I put it to you, this is a quite impressive performance on the part of a machine, right? This is, I'm not saying anything here feels conscious to me, but it feels like it's following trains of thought. I'm doing the steering. I'm asking it Socratic questions, but it's seeing the point in each of them. It is at times a little bit repetitious, and at times it is falling back on conventionalism of one kind or another. But overall, this is at the level of a intelligent grad student and more articulate than most. More articulate than most of the people I have taught over years of running a philosophy meetup group, I must say, just in the pure verbal acuity with which it can, make its case, so to speak. I don't think it's as original, but it's still an impressive performance. Anyway, this is the first of these. I have several others that I might share with people, but I thought I would try this out, see if this gets any interesting reactions. Comments and questions about anything going on here are certainly welcome. All of this was done in an interactive session, single interactive session with the GPT-4 version of OpenAI's systems, which is available for their premium users right now. It's a little bit rate limited because everybody's trying it out. But anyway, that's what I'm seeing these large language models can do on some of these philosophical topics. I think it's fair to say that the level of performance you're going to see on a topic like this, where all of the environing training data that has the same context may be pitched at a very high level, may help it to feel more intelligent, feel more lively, responsive. But then it might, if you were talking about something where most of its training data were cast at a lower level, so to speak. But I still put it to you that this level of understanding of what each successive prompt was driving at, and the subject matter of the dialogue that it was asked to consider, and the conclusions to be drawn from it, was impressive. Anyway, that's the end of this one, and we'll see about getting up another one in a day or two, because they've already done several. Thanks for listening, and as I said, questions or comments welcome.